Jesus and the Law. In the Gospel of Matthew we read the following: "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, nor the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law, until everything is accomplished. Anyone who breaks the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven." Matthew 5:17-19. This pericope is often used as a proof text that Jesus affirmed the Mosaic law in all its stipulations, and is often used to justify certain dietary practices, Sabbath observances and other rules such as compulsory tithing. Not only is this built on a misunderstanding of the words of the text and their context, it is a misunderstanding of the Mosaic law itself, a product of its being read out of context. To understand the Mosaic law in its proper context, we must go back to its origins, the theophany on Mount Sinai itself. It is only Moses who was allowed to go up on the mountain to hear the true voice of God. The Israelites must stay at its base. Indeed, Moses must bring the Ten Commandments down to them. We are told in Exodus 19:12-13, "Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, be careful that you do not go up to the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. Only when a ram's horn sounds and a long blast may they go up to the mountain." In these words we can see a metaphor of divine revelation that unfolds by degrees as manifested in the parable of the sower. The Israelites are like the seed on the path, in that parable pruned by the Ten Commandments and the temple itself. Just as the temple was divided into an outer court, the holy place and the Holy of Holies, so too is purification and the process of spiritual enlightenment. In Deuteronomy 18:14-19 we are given further context. "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your fellow Israelites. You must listen to him, for this is what you asked the Lord your God at Horeb, that is Mount Sinai, on the day of the assembly, when you said, 'Let us not hear the voice of the Lord our God, nor see this great fire any more, or we will die.' The Lord said to me, 'What they said is good. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their fellow Israelites, and I will put my words in his mouth. He will tell them everything I command him. I myself will call to account everyone who does not listen to my words that the prophet speaks in my name.'" These are important words. We're being told that the experience of Moses on Mount Sinai and the people at the base of the mountain provides us with a spiritual model of enlightenment. Moses sees the face of God. The people at the base are scared to move forward and have that sort of relationship with God. Instead, Moses must bring a lower revelation down to them that they can digest. In the words, "Let us not hear the voice of the Lord our God, nor see his great fire any more, or we will die," the Israelites make it clear that they are not yet ready to embrace the full truth about God and his moral vision for them. Instead, Moses must bring the commandments down to them, commandments written on stone and not the human heart. Not only is a prophet like Moses predicted for the future, but a prophet who will lead the people to higher moral truth. This is the original context of the Ten Commandments, which is often not cited. In Numbers 12:8, we hear the voice of God proclaimed to Moses. With him I speak face to face, clearly and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. This is a fundamental foundational statement. Not only does it indicate that Moses sees the truth about God, it tells us that God reveals himself to the people at the base of the mountain in riddles. Riddles hidden within the Mosaic law itself. Similarly, in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus declares, I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world. Matthew 13:35. Moreover, he states, this is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They can hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. Notice that these words mesh squarely with those spoken by Moses on the mountain. With him I speak face to face, clearly and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. Not surprisingly, in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus begins his public proclamation from the top of a mountain like Moses. Thus we read in Matthew 5:1. Now when he saw the crowds, he went up on the mountainside and sat down and began to teach them. Having adopted the magisterial, that is the teaching chair of Moses, Jesus, the second Moses, prophesied in Numbers. More specifically, Deuteronomy 18:14-19, he begins to proclaim the high revelation of God not revealed to those at the base of the mountain in Moses' time. Jesus begins not with the laws and stipulations written on stone, but with the Beatitudes. That is, virtues written on the human heart. Here he champions the poor in spirit, those who mourn, those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, the merciful, peacemakers, those persecuted because of righteousness and the pure in heart. Matthew 5:3-10. Thus primacy of place is given to the law written on the human heart over those written on tablets of stone. Thus is fulfilled the prophecy of Jeremiah 31:33. This is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel at that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God and they will be my people. Like Moses on the mountain, Jesus then speaks the following riddle. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law of the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. I tell you the truth, unless heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Anyone who breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5:17-19. Prima facie, this comes across as a positive validation of the Mosaic law as a positivistic construct. That is, the notion that the stipulations of the Mosaic law are enforced till the end of time. This is, of course, how those at the base of the mountain of spiritual enlightenment would interpret these words. However, Jesus, like Moses, is speaking in riddles here, so that the hearts of many of his listeners will be ever hearing but never understanding, and ever seeing but never perceiving. Indeed, the key to the riddle is supplied in the next verse. For I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. Chapter 5, verse 20. To understand this law behind the law, one must engage in moral conduct that is higher than that followed by the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. Virtue becomes the key that opens the mind's eye to the true revelation hinted at on Mount Sinai. Virtue is the way forward up the side of the mountain to Moses that separates us from the Israelites at the base of the mountain who have the law written on stone. Now this is very, very important, because if we look at the pericope that deals with Jesus not coming to abolish the law, people often take that as a contained unit on its own. What they fail to take in is the answer to the riddle that then comes between Matthew 5 and 7, where we are told the spiritual law that lies behind the positivistic construct of the Mosaic law. Between Matthew 5 and 7, Jesus outlines the hallmarks of the higher moral consciousness. Do not murder is extended to its root cause, unjust anger. Adultery is extended to include all forms of sexual impurity. Divorce allowed under Mosaic law is rejected in favour of magnanimous fidelity. That's a very important point. To a Jew in Jesus' own day, he, by questioning the right to divorce allowed under Mosaic law, is in fact undermining the Mosaic law as a positivistic construct. Again, what he's telling us is that these stipulations of the Mosaic law are a lower, crude, worldly interpretation of 10 spiritual principles, which are the 10 fruit of the tree of life. Jesus himself is the tree of life. In the book of Genesis, we hear the tree of life versus the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Jesus, of course, is the tree of life, as we hear in the book of Revelation. But there is a wisdom and a knowledge and an understanding that comes from the book of knowledge of good and evil, which is what separated our first parents from God in the first place. In these verses between Matthew 5 and 7, we're also told that truth-telling is extended from formal oaths to include all spoken words. There is to be no revenge. One must love and forgive one's enemies. One must care for the poor and not parade one's good deeds before others. So too, fasting and other practices must move beyond external observation into a desire for genuine spiritual growth. So too, judgment must be brought into line with all of these spiritual truths. Jesus tells his listeners that they must enter through the narrow gate, 7:13, if they are to see with spiritual eyes.